Thomas adjusted the crisp white napkin folded over his arm, his hands a little shaky. Tonight wasn't just any night at the Starlight Ballroom. It was the night Hollywood's elite were descending, and among them the brightest star of all, Elvis Presley. The very name made the air crackle with a strange kind of electricity. Thomas had only been working at this fancy hotel for 6 months fresh out of high school and needing any job he could get. His uniform stiff and a bit too big in places, felt like a costume he hadn't quite grown into. The ballroom was already buzzing even though it was still early. Crystal chandeliers twinkled overhead, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. Waiters, like synchronized swimmers, weaved through the growing crowd, balancing trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. Thomas tried to mimic their smooth movements, but every step felt clumsy. Every glance from a passing guest felt like judgment. His mind, however, wasn't entirely on his duties. It was miles away, in a small hospital room. His younger sister Lily was there, battling a nasty lung infection. The hospital bills were piling up faster than dry leaves in autumn. Every dollar Thomas earned, every extra shift he picked up, went straight into that bottomless pit. He worked tirelessly, often going to bed so tired his bones ached only to wake up and do it all over again. The Starlight Ballroom paid well, but it demanded perfection. And tonight, with Elvis Presley in the building, perfection was not just expected, it was required. A senior waiter, Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was a rodot of wrinkles from years of polite smiles, claps Thomas on the shoulder. "Keep your chin up, Thomas. Big night. Don't let the stars dazzle you too much." Thomas managed a weak smile. Dazzle wasn't the word. Terrify, maybe. He'd seen pictures of Elvis, of course. The famous hair, the piercing eyes, the way he just seemed to own every space he entered. Thomas had even heard a few of his songs on the radio, usually when his mom was humming along while doing dishes, but seeing him in person, that was a whole different level. The doors to the main entrance swung open, and a ripple went through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers started, then grew into a low murmur, like the hum of 1,000 excited bees. A hush fell over the room, as if someone had pressed a mute button, and then he appeared. Elvis Presley. He walked in, surrounded by his entourage, a solid wall of men in dark suits. But even with them, Elvis was unmistakable. He was taller than Thomas had imagined, broader. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, and his suit, a sharp, dark cut, seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He had that famous, confident stride, a slight swagger that said he knew he was the king, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He was carrying a tray of ice water with lemon slices, heading towards a table near the back, his assigned area, but Elvis wasn't going to the back. He was headed right for a prominent table in the center, a table Thomas would have to pass to get to his own. As Elvis moved through the room, flashes from cameras popped like fireflies. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Women gasped. Some even fanned themselves. Men nodded, a mix of respect and envy on their faces. Elvis acknowledged them with a small nod, a brief wave, a dazzling smile that made the women sigh. He looked utterly at ease, completely in control. But as Thomas watched, something flickered in Elvis's eyes. Just for a second, a momentary flash of something tired, almost weary, quickly hidden behind the famous charming grin. Thomas wondered if it was just his imagination. He blinked. No, the grin was back, flawless, radiating charm. It was probably just the angle of the light, or maybe Thomas was just too nervous to see straight. Elvis reached his table, and his entourage quickly formed a semicircle around him, creating a small island of privacy in the sea of people. He settled into his chair, a faint sigh escaping his lips. A sound only his closest companions or someone extremely attuned might have noticed. Thomas, however, was just a nervous waiter, trying to avoid tripping over his own feet as he navigated the increasingly dense crowd. He just needed to get this water to table 12 and then he could breathe. He just needed to not mess up. Not tonight. Clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft strains of a jazz band playing in the corner. It all blended into a swirling, dizzying hum for Thomas. He was sweating under his stiff collar, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His arm, balancing the heavy tray of ice water, felt like it was made of lead. Each step he took felt precarious, like walking on a tightrope stretched over a canyon. "Need to pick up more water, Thomas?" Mr. Henderson's voice, sharp but not unkind, cut through the noise. "No, sir. Just finishing up with table 12, Thomas replied, trying to sound confident. He was almost there. Just past the velvet rope section, just past the table where the very air seemed to vibrate with importance. Elvis Presley's table. Thomas tried not to look directly at the king, but it was impossible not to feel his presence. Elvis was talking animatedly with a couple of men, one of them a famous movie director, the other a record executive. Their laughter was deep, resonant. Elvis's head was thrown back, a genuine hearty laugh escaping him. He looked relaxed, completely in his element. But then, just as Thomas was about to pass, a woman with a towering beehive hairdo and a dress that sparkled like a disco ball suddenly stepped backward, right into his path. She was laughing too loudly at something a man next to her had said, completely oblivious to Thomas and his tray. Thomas gasped, his eyes widening in horror. He tried to swerve, to stop, to do anything to avoid a collision. His foot slipped on a rogue olive that someone must have dropped his arm. Already straining, jerked, time seemed to stretch, pulling apart into slow motion. The tray tilted. The heavy glass pitcher of ice water filled to the brim began to slide. It wasn't a gentle slide. It was a rapid, inevitable cascade. Thomas's eyes followed its path, frozen in terror. He saw the ice cubes tumbling, the clear liquid sloshing over the brim, then pouring out in a torrent. And then he saw where it was heading, right over the edge of the table, directly onto Elvis Presley. The water, cold and clear, splashed down. It hit Elvis's shoulder, first a dark patch, immediately blooming on the expensive fabric of his suit jacket. Then it ran down his arm, splattering onto his leg. A few ice cubes bounced off his knee and onto the floor with tiny clinks. The laughter at Elvis's table died instantly. The entire room, which moments before had been a symphony of chatter, fell into an abrupt, terrifying silence. It was the kind of silence that screams. Every eye in the ballroom, it seemed, swiveled to the same spot. Thomas, the waiter, standing there with the now empty, dripping pitcher in his shaking hand, and Elvis Presley sitting soaked at his table. Thomas's face went white. His breath hitched in his throat. He could feel the blood draining from his face, replaced by a cold, clammy dread. His heart didn't just thump now. It hammered against his ribs like a desperate bird trapped in a cage. He looked at the dark, spurting stain on Elvis's suit. Then, up at the king's face. Elvis was absolutely still. His hand, which had been resting on the table, hadn't moved. His famous eyes, usually sparkling with life, were now fixed on Thomas. There was no immediate reaction, no shout, no angry outburst, not even a flinch, just that intense, unblinking gaze. Thomas's mind raced a blur of worst-case scenarios. He was going to be fired tonight. Right here in front of everyone, he would lose his job, his only source of income. Lily's bills, his family's hopes, all of it would crash down. His vision blurred not from tears, but from sheer panic. He opened his mouth to apologize, but no words came out. His tongue felt thick and useless. He felt the heat of 100 eyes burning into him, judging him. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. Everyone was waiting for the king of rock and roll to unleash his fury, waiting for the legendary temper, for the grand display of displeasure. Thomas braced himself, his body tensing, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. He squeezed his eyes shut for a split second, wishing the floor would open up and swallow him whole. He wished he could just disappear. When he opened his eyes again, he saw Elvis still looking at him, his face unreadable. And then, slowly, a small, almost imperceptible shift in Elvis's expression. Thomas couldn't tell what it was, but it wasn't anger. It was something else, entirely. The silence stretched, unbearable for another agonizing second. Then the king reacted, and it was nothing like anyone expected. The silence was a living, breathing thing pressing down on Thomas, suffocating him. He could hear his own frantic heartbeat in his ears. His eyes wide with terror were locked on Elvis Presley's face. The famous singer hadn't moved a muscle since the water splashed him. He just sat there still as a statue. Soaked Thomas waited for the storm to break. He expected a roar, a demand for his manager, a glare that could melt steel. Then it grew. Elvis's lips, which had been a thin line, curved upward. His eyes, which had been fixed on Thomas with an unreadable intensity, now crinkled at the corners. And then the chuckle turned into a genuine booming laugh. It started deep in his chest, a rich warm sound that filled the sudden vacuum of silence in the ballroom. He threw his head back just as he had moments before, but this time it was from unbridled amusement. He laughed so hard his shoulders shook. The people at his table stared at him bewildered, then at Thomas, then back at Elvis. Their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The entire room was shocked, absolutely, utterly shocked. People murmured, What's happening? Is he laughing?" "He's not mad." Thomas, meanwhile, was even more confused than anyone. Laughter. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Was he just going to laugh him out of the building? Elvis took a deep breath, still chuckling, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye with a finger. He looked down at the dark, wet stain on his expensive suit. Then he looked back up at Thomas, whose face was still a picture of frozen horror. "Well," Elvis said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle, the laughter still bubbling beneath his words. "I guess I needed a little cooling off, didn't I?" He grinned. It wasn't the dazzling, perfect grin for the cameras. It was a softer, more human smile, full of warmth and a touch of mischief. He looked at the movie director next to him, who was still gaping. "Guess I won't be needing a shower tonight, huh, George?" "George." The director finally found his voice. "Elvis, are you all right?" "Your suit." Elvis waved a dismissive hand. "Suit's fine. It'll dry, or I'll get a new one. No big deal." He turned his full attention back to Thomas. His eyes were kind, almost sympathetic. "Son, you look like you've seen a ghost, or like you've just spilt a gallon of ice water on the king of rock and roll." Thomas finally managed to croak at her. I don't know what happened. I'm so clumsy. I'll get some towels. Whoa, easy there." Elvis interrupted, still smiling. "Relax. It's just water. Happens to the best of us." He gestured vaguely at the empty pitcher in Thomas's hand. "Looks like you had a bit of a tumble there. Are you all right? You didn't get hurt, did you?" Thomas blinked. "Hurt?" He was worried about him. "No, sir, I'm fine. It's just your suit." "Don't you worry about the suit," Elvis said firmly. He looked around the silent ballroom. Then his gaze swept over the stunned faces of the other guests. He seemed to understand the tension, the expectation. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping just a little, but still loud enough for many to hear. "Look, everybody, it's an accident. No harm done. Let's not make a fuss. This young man is just doing his job." He then looked directly at Thomas again, his eyes softening even more. "You look pretty shaken up, son. Rough night?" Thomas couldn't believe it. Instead of anger, he was getting concern. Instead of a lecture, he was getting a question about his well-being. He was so overwhelmed he could only nod mutely. "Come here," Elvis said, beckoning with a hand. "Don't just stand there looking like you're about to faint. Pull up a chair. Sit down for a minute. You look like you need a breather." The suggestion was so casual, so unexpected, that it caused another wave of murmuring through the ballroom. Elvis Presley inviting a clumsy waiter to sit at his table after being soaked. It was unheard of. It was completely and utterly shocking. Thomas, still in a daze, felt a strange warmth spreading through him, not just from the relief that he wasn't fired, but from the unexpected kindness. He looked around, saw Mr. Henderson looking at him with wide eyes, a mix of relief and awe on his face. "Go on, Thomas," Mr. Henderson mouthed, giving him a small, encouraging nod. Slowly, still trembling slightly, Thomas put the empty pitcher back on his tray and approached Elvis's table. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. King of rock and roll, soaked in ice water, was waiting to talk to him. Thomas approached the table as if walking on eggshells. He didn't sit down, not exactly. He hovered unsure near the edge of the table where Elvis was seated. The other guests at the table, sensing Elvis's shift in mood, had quieted down, watching the scene unfold with fascinated expressions. "Just stand there, son. No need to sit if you're working," Elvis clarified, picking up a napkin and dabbing at his wet shoulder. "Just wanted to make sure you're okay. You looked like you saw a ghost. You got that look in your eyes, like the world just ended." Thomas finally found his voice a little shaky. I thought I was going to be fired, sir. I really need this job." Elvis's expression softened even further. "Fired for a little spilled water? Don't be ridiculous. Everyone makes mistakes. Trust me, I've made plenty." He paused, a thoughtful look on his face. "More than you could ever imagine. Sometimes the biggest ones are the ones you make when you're trying your hardest, or when you're just plain exhausted." He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly as if sharing a secret. "You know, when I was first starting out, playing little clubs, I was so nervous sometimes I'd forget the lyrics right in the middle of a song, or I'd trip over a guitar cable. My hands would shake so much I could barely hold the microphone. Felt like the end of the world every single time. But you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you keep going. That's all you can do." Thomas listened, mesmerized. This wasn't the untouchable icon for magazines and movie screens. This was a man talking about his own struggles, his own human errors. It was disarmingly honest. "You seem a little more than just clumsy," Elvis continued, his gaze direct and empathetic. "Something on your mind. You've got that distracted look, like you're thinking about 1,000 other things at once. That's usually when accidents happen." Questions so direct and kind broke through Thomas's carefully constructed walls. All the stress, the fear, the sleepless nights, the worry about Lily suddenly welled up. He found himself nodding, a lump forming in his throat. "My sister," Thomas began, his voice barely a whisper. "She's sick in the hospital, and the bills they're just getting bigger. I work extra shifts, but it's never enough. I need this job to help my family." Elvis's smiley troubled. "Ah, son, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's a heavy burden for a young man to carry." He reached out, not to touch Thomas, but to tap gently on the table between them. "I know what it's like to have family troubles. My mama, she meant the world to me. And when she was sick, there wasn't anything I wouldn't do for her." His eyes held a distant, sorrowful look for a moment. "Family comes first, always. You're a good brother for taking care of her." He then looked around the table at his companions, a determined glint in his eye. "You know what? I've had enough champagne for tonight. I think I'll switch to a nice cold glass of water, and not the kind that ends up on my lap." He winked at Thomas, trying to lighten the mood. "And make sure this young man gets some rest, and maybe a fresh glass of water for himself. He looks like he could use one." The record executive, seeing the shift in Elvis's focus, quickly chimed in. "Of course, Elvis. Anything you need." Elvis turned back to Thomas, his voice softer again. "Don't worry, son. Just focus on your sister. That's what's important. Everything else, it'll work out. Take it from me. There's always a way forward, even when it feels like there isn't." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "And don't you worry about that suit, seriously. It's just a suit." He gave Thomas a small, reassuring nod, a gesture that somehow conveyed more understanding and warmth than 1,000 words could have. Thomas felt a strange, profound sense of relief wash over him. King of rock and roll, the biggest star in the world, had not only forgiven him, but had also listened to him, understood him, and even offered him comfort. It was a moment that transcended the glitter of Hollywood, stripping away the celebrity facade and revealing a raw, surprising humanity. Thomas, for the first time since the spill, felt a tiny spark of hope flicker within him. Maybe, just maybe, everything wouldn't fall apart after all. The immediate buzz after Elvis's reaction was unlike anything Thomas had ever witnessed. It wasn't the shocked silence of before, but a low, amazed murmur that spread like wildfire through the ballroom. People pointed, whispered, and looked at Thomas, not with pity or scorn, but with a strange mixture of awe and curiosity. Mr. Henderson, the senior waiter, rushed over to Thomas, a towel in hand for Elvis, his face pale with a mix of fear and utter disbelief. Quickly dabbed at Elvis's suit while mumbling apologies. "Quite all right, Henderson," Elvis said, his voice calm. "No harm done, just a bit of a baptism by ice water, that's all." He gave a small conspiratorial wink to Thomas. Mr. Henderson straightened up, looking from Elvis to Thomas, a new respect dawning in his eyes. He had expected a public dressing down. A massive scene. Instead, he had witnessed something truly remarkable. As Thomas walked away from the table, still clutching the empty pitcher, he felt like he was floating. His legs still trembled, but the dread had been replaced by a dizzying sense of wonder. He heard snippets. He laughed. He was so kind. "I can't believe it." They said he has a temper, but he was so understanding. What could have been a disaster for Thomas and a PR nightmare for Elvis had become a testament to the King's character. The spill wasn't the story anymore. Elvis's reaction was. Back in the service hallway, away from the glittering crowd, Thomas leaned against a cool wall, taking deep, shaky breaths. His fellow waiters and kitchen staff, who had heard the whispers and seen the commotion, gathered around him. "Thomas, what happened? Is it true he wasn't mad?" Thomas, still trying to process it all, could only nod. He was really kind. He asked about me. He even told me he used to make mistakes too." He recounted the conversation in hushed, almost disbelieving tones, especially the part about Lily, a dishwasher. A gruff old man named Sal, who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be heard. He was a good boy, but that takes the cake." Kitchen manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Peterson, who usually had a face like granite, approached him. Thomas braced himself for a reprimand, for a warning, for something, but Mrs. Peterson simply placed a hand on his shoulder. Her expression was unreadable at first, then softened. "Thomas," she said, her voice unusually gentle, "go home, your shift is over, and take the rest of the week off. Paid. Take care of your sister. Mr. Henderson will explain everything." Thomas stared at her, stunned. "Paid, but I need to work. I can't miss the money." "It's already handled," Mrs. Peterson said, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. Now, go." He knew instantly that this was not just for Mrs. Peterson. This had to be connected to Elvis. The speed, the generosity, it was too much, too sudden to be coincident. A seed of hope, small but persistent, began to sprout in his chest. The next day the newspapers were abuzz, not about a spilled drink, but about Elvis Presley's unexpected and heartwarming reaction. Headlines screamed, "King's compassion shines. Elvis's kind heart revealed after waiter's mishap." Pictures showed a smiling Elvis, a damp patch on his suit, shaking hands with a flustered Thomas. Thomas didn't remember shaking hands, but he supposed the camera had caught some gesture that looked like it. The story was everywhere. Radio stations talked about it, talk shows discussed it. People loved it. It showed a side of Elvis that many hadn't seen, not the flashy performer, but the humble, empathetic human being. It resonated with everyone who had ever made a mistake, or worried about their family, or longed for a moment of unexpected kindness. For Thomas, reading the articles in a quiet corner of the hospital waiting room, it was surreal. He, the nobody waiter, was part of a national story, but more importantly, his sister Lily, pale but stable in her hospital bed, was unaware of the quiet miracle that had just unfolded, a ripple effect from a moment of clumsiness. He clutched the newspaper. A strange mix of celebrity gossip and personal salvation. The world, for the first time in a long time, felt a little less heavy. While Thomas was processing the whirlwind of his unexpected fame and the equally unexpected paid time off, Elvis Presley was back in his luxurious suite, changing out of his damp suit. His personal tailor was already on his way to measure him for a new one. But Elvis barely thought about the garment. His mind was still on the young waiter. "Did you get his name?" Elvis asked his aide Charlie as he pulled on a comfortable silk robe. Charlie was a man of quiet efficiency, rarely flustered. "Yes, boss, Thomas Miller," Charlie replied, already scribbling notes in a small pad. "New here, apparently, Mr. Henderson." The head waiter was very apologetic. "Said he's a hard worker." Elvis nodded slowly. "Miller. Thomas Miller." He looked genuinely terrified. "And then when he talked about his sister, that hit me, Charlie." He walked to the window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city below. "Remember when my mama got sick and we didn't have 2 dimes to rub together? That boy's carrying a heavy load." Charlie, ever practical, simply asked, "What do you want to do, boss?" He knew Elvis. Knew that a moment like this wasn't just a fleeting act of public kindness. When Elvis's heart was touched, he acted. "Find out about his sister," Elvis said, turning from the window. His voice was low, thoughtful. "Hospital bills. Everything discreetly, mind you. No fanfare, no reporters. Just find out what he needs." Charlie nodded, already dialing a number on his rotary phone. He knew the drill. Elvis had a long history of quiet, anonymous acts of generosity. He had paid for strangers' medical bills, bought houses for people down on their luck, and sent money to countless charities. He rarely spoke of these things, seeing them as private matters between him and his conscience. Meanwhile, Thomas, back in his modest apartment, felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The paid time off was a godsend, but the underlying problem, Lily's medical bills, still loomed large. The newspaper articles made him feel like a character in a movie, not a real person with real problems. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just a temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of celebrity that wouldn't actually change his life. He visited Lily every day, bringing her small gifts, a new coloring book, a packet of her favorite candy. He read the newspaper stories to his mother, who wept with relief and disbelief at the kindness of Elvis Presley. "An angel that man is," she kept saying, crossing herself. Thomas tried to believe it. He truly did. Practical side of him, the part that calculated hospital costs and rent, worried. The king had been kind. Yes, but kings, even rock and roll kings, lived in a different world. They offered kind words, not long-term solutions for a family struggling to survive. Still, something had shifted inside Thomas. That brief, raw conversation with Elvis had made him feel seen not as a uniform, but as a person. The king hadn't been angry, hadn't been annoyed. He had been human. He had listened. And that in itself was a powerful thing. It made Thomas stand a little straighter even when his worries tried to drag him down. He spent his days off at the hospital, watching Lily sleep or talking to her in soft tones, telling her about the crazy night at work, omitting the terrifying parts, and focusing on the surprising kindness. He found himself replaying Elvis's words over and over in his mind. "Family comes first. Always. You're a good brother. And there's always a way forward, even when it feels like there isn't." He clung to those words like a lifeline in a stormy sea. He didn't know how things would get better, but Elvis's unwavering conviction, his genuine belief, had planted a tiny seed of hope in Thomas's weary heart. He just hoped it wasn't a false hope, a cruel trick of fate. He hoped that the king's kindness wasn't just a fleeting public display, but something real and lasting. 2 weeks after the incident, Thomas was back at work, albeit still feeling a little like a celebrity. Guests would sometimes whisper and point, and a few even asked him about the king's reaction. He always told the story with a new sense of pride, emphasizing Elvis's kindness. Life at home, however, remained difficult. Lily was slowly improving, but the hospital bills continued to mount. The paid time off had helped, but it was just a small dent in a mountain of debt. Thomas was back to picking up extra shifts, his body aching, his mind constantly worried. One afternoon, as Thomas was prepping tables for the evening rush, Mr. Henderson called him aside, his face unusually serious. "Thomas, you have a phone call in my office. It's unusual." Thomas's heart leaped into his throat. Was it about Lily? Had something gone wrong? He rushed to Mr. Henderson's small, cluttered office, his mind racing. He picked up the receiver, his hand shaking. "Hello? Is this Thomas Miller?" A calm, professional female voice asked. "Yes, this is Thomas. Mr. Miller, my name is Eleanor Vance. I work for Mr. Elvis Presley." Thomas nearly dropped the phone. Elvis Presley? His stomach did a nervous flip-flop. "Oh, hello, Ms. Vance." "Mr. Presley was very moved by your story the other night," Eleanor continued, her voice warm but businesslike. "He's concerned about your sister, Lily." Thomas swallowed hard. She's doing a little better, thank you, but the hospital bills are still very high." He tried to sound strong, but his voice cracked at the end. "Yes, Mr. Presley understands that. He asked me to reach out to you." There was a brief pause, and Thomas held his breath. "Mr. Presley has instructed his team to cover all of Lily's current and future medical expenses related to her current illness, every bill, every treatment, until she is fully recovered. And he would also like to set up a small trust for her future education, should she choose to pursue it." Thomas's hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. It felt like the ground had just fallen out from under him, but instead of falling, he was floating upwards towards the light. "Excuse me," he finally managed to croak, utterly disbelieving. All of it." "Yes, Mr. Miller, all of it," Eleanor confirmed. "We'll be contacting the hospital directly, and they will work with our legal team. There's nothing for you to worry about financially regarding Lily's condition anymore. We just ask that you focus on her recovery and your family." Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes, hot and sudden. He tried to speak again, to express gratitude, but only a choked sob escaped. He pressed a hand over his mouth, trying to compose himself. "Mr. Miller?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer now. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Thomas whispered, his voice thick. "Yes, I don't know what to say. This is unbelievable. Thank you. Please, thank Mr. Presley. Tell him thank you so much. This means everything. He just wants to help. He believes in looking out for one another." After she gave him some instructions and a number to call, if he had any questions, the line went dead. Thomas slowly lowered the receiver back into its cradle. He stood there for a long moment, the silence of Mr. Henderson's office echoing around him. Then a joyous, uncontrolled laugh burst from him, followed by fresh tears. He stumbled out of the office, his legs wobbly, and found Mr. Henderson watching him with a knowing smile. "Everything all right, Thomas?" Mr. Henderson asked, though his eyes twinkling suggested he already knew the answer. Thomas could only nod, tears streaming down his face, a wide, tremulous smile on his lips. It's more than all right, Mr. Henderson. It's a miracle." He ran through the hallways, past the busy kitchen, past the other waiters, not caring who saw his tears or his moofy grin. He needed to call his mother. He needed to go to the hospital. He needed to tell Lily, even though she might not fully understand, that the king of rock and roll, the man who had simply laughed when he was soaked, had just saved their family. The burden, the crushing weight he had carried for so long had just been lifted. The news that Elvis Presley was covering Lily's medical bills spread through Thomas's family like wildfire. His mother wept tears of relief, clutching him in a fierce hug. His father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, simply squeezed Thomas's shoulder and nodded a profound gratitude in his eyes. For weeks the small apartment buzzed with a newfound lightness, a joy that had been missing for too long. Lily, still weak but recovering, brightened noticeably. Once the financial strain was lifted, her parents, freed from the constant worry, were able to spend more time with her, read to her, and simply be present, without the shadow of impending debt hanging over them. Thomas saw the color returning to her cheeks, the spark rekindling in her eyes. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. The legal team from Elvis's office was incredibly efficient. Within days, the hospital was informed and the process of settling bills began. Thomas no longer received dreaded envelopes filled with demands for payment. Instead, he received updates on Lily's progress and calls from cheerful nurses, all courtesy of the invisible hand of Elvis Presley. This profound act of kindness transformed Thomas. The shy, anxious waiter, who had constantly worried about making a mistake, was replaced by a more confident, outgoing young man. He still worked hard, but the gnawing fear was gone. He could focus on his job, on learning, on being a better server. He even found himself smiling more genuinely. He talked about Elvis often, not boastfully, but with a deep sense of reverence. Told his story to anyone who would listen, to his colleagues, to the delivery drivers, even to curious guests. He didn't just talk about the spilled drink. He talked about the reaction, about the laugh, about the genuine empathy in Elvis's eyes, and about the quiet, life-changing help that followed. He didn't have to, Thomas would often say, his voice full of wonder. He's the king. He could have been angry. He could have ignored me. But he saw a person. He saw that I was struggling, and he helped without asking for anything in return. This act of kindness inspired Thomas. He realized the incredible power of a single moment of compassion. He started looking for ways to pay it forward, even in small ways. He offered to cover shifts for tired colleagues, knowing how much extra money could mean. He stayed late to help clean up even when it wasn't his duty. He listened more closely when people at work or in his neighborhood talked about their own struggles. One evening, he saw a new, very young waiter, barely older than himself, looking lost and overwhelmed in the bustling kitchen. The boy had just broken a plate and was clearly on the verge of tears. Terrified of Mrs. Peterson's wrath, Thomas remembered his own fear on that fateful night. He walked over to the young waiter, calmly picked up the broken pieces and gently placed them in the trash. "Don't worry about it," Thomas said, his voice kind. "Happens to everyone, especially when you're new. Just take a deep breath. We all make mistakes. It's how you learn." The young waiter looked at him, eyes wide with surprise and relief. "Really? Really?" Thomas said with a reassuring smile. "It's just a plate, and you're doing great. Just keep at it." Mrs. Peterson, observing from her office door, gave Thomas a small, knowing nod. She saw the change in him, the quiet strength that had blossomed. It was a ripple effect. Elvis's kindness had not just saved a family from financial ruin. It had also cultivated compassion in a young man who now understood its profound impact. Thomas knew his life would never be the same. The incident with Elvis wasn't just a story he told. It was a foundational moment that had shaped him, teaching him about resilience, the power of empathy, and the incredible, unexpected kindness that could exist in the world. Even from the biggest stars. He knew he would never forget it, and he would spend his life trying to pass that kindness on, one small act at a time. Months turned into a year. Lily was fully recovered, healthy and vibrant, attending school with a new scholarship that Elvis's trust had provided. Thomas was a seasoned waiter, now confident and capable, often seen mentoring the newer staff, always with a calm smile and a reassuring word. The story of the Elvis spill had faded from the national headlines, but it remained a quiet legend within the Starlight Ballroom. Then one crisp autumn evening, the unmistakable buzz returned to the ballroom. Rumors had been swirling for days. Elvis Presley was returning to Los Angeles for a special charity gala. Thomas felt a familiar knot of anticipation in his stomach, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a mixture of excitement and a deep, quiet gratitude. He spotted Elvis almost immediately after the king made his grand entrance. Elvis looked as magnificent as ever, perhaps a little older, a little more world-weary around the eyes, but still radiating that magnetic star power. He was surrounded by flashing cameras and adoring fans just like before. Thomas, carrying a tray of champagne glasses, found himself navigating the crowd towards a section where he knew Elvis would pass. He didn't want to cause a scene or seem like he was seeking attention. But he also knew he couldn't let this opportunity pass him by. He wanted to look the king in the eye, not as a panic waiter, but as a young man whose life had been profoundly touched. As Elvis moved through the crowd acknowledging greetings, he suddenly paused, His eyes scanning the room landed on Thomas. For a moment, Thomas wondered if Elvis would even remember him. It had been over a year. Elvis met thousands of people, but then a flicker of recognition crossed Elvis's face. A genuine smile softer than the public one spread across his lips. He excused himself from the small group he was speaking with and walked a few steps towards Thomas, who stood rooted to the spot, tray still balanced expertly. "Well, well, if it isn't my favorite waiter," Elvis said, his voice warm and familiar. He had to raise it slightly over the din, but his eyes were focused entirely on Thomas. "No spills tonight, I hope?" He winked. Thomas felt a rush of warmth. He hadn't just been remembered. He had been recognized, and with genuine affection. "No, sir, Mr. Presley," Thomas replied, a wide smile breaking out on his face. "Clean as a whistle tonight. Good to see you again." "You're looking good, son. Different. You got some color in your cheeks and you're walking a lot straighter." "That's thanks to you," Sir Thomas said, his voice earnest. "Lily? She's doing so much better. She's back at school, and she's getting stronger every day. And the scholarship. It means the world to all of us." Elvis nodded, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "That's good to hear, Thomas. That's real good to hear. Told you things would work out, didn't I?" "You did," Thomas agreed, a lump forming in his throat. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Presley. You didn't just help my sister. You helped my whole family. You changed everything for us." Elvis reached out and gently placed a hand on Thomas's arm, a gesture of camaraderie. "Son, you were doing the hard work already. You were fighting for your family. I just gave you a little boost, that's all. You're a good man, Thomas. Don't ever forget that." He paused, his gaze softening. "And never forget that a little kindness, a little understanding goes a long way, especially when things are tough. You never know whose day you might change." He squeezed Thomas's arm once more, then released it. The people around them were beginning to notice the interaction cameras subtly aiming their way. "All right, Thomas. You got a job to do," Elvis said with a smile, turning back towards his waiting party. "Don't let me keep you." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. As Elvis walked away, gracefully rejoining the glittering crowd, Thomas stood there for a moment, simply breathing. He felt a profound sense of peace. He had said what he needed to say. Elvis had seen him, remembered him, and reinforced the lessons he had unknowingly taught. It wasn't just about the money or the fame or the act of charity. It was about the human connection. It was about a king who, despite all his fame and fortune, had seen a struggling young man and extended a hand of genuine compassion. And that, Thomas knew, was the greatest gift of all. The second meeting, though brief, solidified the transformation within Thomas. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a deeply personal testament to the power of human connection and compassion. The Elvis spill became a cherished memory, not a source of embarrassment, but a defining moment in his life. Thomas continued to work at the Starlight Ballroom for several more years. He became a respected figure among his colleagues, known for his steady hands, his calm demeanor, and his quiet wisdom. He often shared the story of Elvis, not to boast, but to illustrate a point about kindness. "You never know who you're serving," he'd say, "and you never know how one small moment can change someone's life or even your own." He learned that the greatest impact wasn't always measured in grand gestures, but in the simple act of seeing another person's struggle and responding with empathy. He made it a point to be that person for others. He mentored new waiters just as Mr. Henderson had mentored him, teaching them not just how to carry a tray, but how to carry themselves with dignity, even under pressure. He listened to their worries, offered quiet advice, and sometimes a little financial help from his own savings when he could spare it. Always anonymously, just like Elvis had initially tried to be. Lily thrived. She went on to attend college, excelling in her studies, never forgetting the incredible generosity that had made her education possible. She often spoke of a guardian angel who had stepped in during their darkest hour. Thomas would just smile, knowing who that angel was, but letting her discover his true name when she was older, and could truly appreciate the depth of his character. Beyond the fame years past, Elvis Presley continued to be the king, but his public persona sometimes overshadowed the quiet acts of kindness he performed away from the spotlight. Yet, for Thomas and his family, that one moment in the Starlight Ballroom when a drink was spilled and a heart was opened was the truest representation of the man. Thomas eventually moved on from being a waiter. He used the stability and confidence he gained to pursue a different path, one that allowed him to continue helping people. He became a social worker, dedicating his life to assisting families in similar financial and medical crises to what his own family had faced. He knew firsthand the weight of such burdens, and he knew the profound relief that a helping hand could bring. He carried Elvis's lesson with him. There's always a way forward, even when it feels like there isn't. And he spent his career showing countless families that truth, guiding them, comforting them, and finding them the resources they needed. He often found himself telling them, "Someone once helped me when I felt completely lost, and I promised myself I'd pay it forward." The story of the clumsy waiter and the compassionate king became a quiet legend passed down through Thomas's family. It was a story told at family gatherings, a reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, profound goodness can emerge. It wasn't about the celebrity, but about the shared humanity. Elvis Presley eventually passed away, leaving behind an unparalleled musical legacy. But for Thomas Miller, his legacy was far more personal. It was the legacy of a man who saw a struggling stranger, chose kindness over anger, and in doing so changed a life forever. It was a heartwarming testament to the ripple effect of empathy, proving that even a small act of compassion, born from a moment of unexpected grace, could resonate through years, inspiring a chain of kindness. And that, Thomas knew, was a legacy more powerful than any song